Well, welcome back, everyone. We are here for another dose of Joint School. So thank you for tuning in, and thank you, Professor Phillips, for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a real honor to have you with us. And today we will be digging into the topic of healthy aging, how to keep active as the years go on, and how to keep active for as many years as possible, and particularly in the context of persistent joint pain and getting ready for a joint replacement or recovering from these operations. But before we start digging into that, so by way of introduction, Professor Phillips is a professor at the Department of Kinesiology and a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair at McMaster University in Ontario, Canada. And as we can see, it's a nice cold day over there today.
It is cold.
Well, so I guess if we start with, begin at the beginning, so to speak. Your title as a professor of kinesiology. What is kinesiology?
Yeah, we define kinesiology as human movement, the study of human movement. So it's a broad umbrella that covers, in my research area, physiology, but we have people who also do the biomechanics of human movement. And then we have people who are also interested in what is it that motivates people to be more active or to be less active. And also people who study motor regulation or motor control. So how the brain talks to muscles and makes us move. So it's, I think 20 years ago, you would have called it a Department of Physical Education. Now it's just more the science of that.
Yeah, okay, well, fascinating. I mean, in many ways, one could almost think that you're dealing with what, in another time might almost have been considered alchemy, this idea of, or you're sort of working towards a sort of the elixir of life or the fountain of eternal youth, but very much evidence-based and grounded in research.
Something like that anyway. Yeah, that's embedded in there. It's a little bit, and not, without being too trite, the mission, and probably in the last 10 years in my research program, has been to try and help people what we call age successfully. And, we'll go into what that means, I'm sure. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so can you tell us a bit more then about your main field of interest within this space?
Yeah, so the tissue we put in the middle of our research program is skeletal muscle. We're interested in, and I would say probably, and I've been a McMaster now for 23 years. The first 10 years I was there, I draw a line down the middle, and we studied younger people, and I was interested in what we could do for very active, very healthy younger people to make their muscles as big and strong as possible. So I would say more towards the sort of sporting endeavor and high-end athlete scenario. And then more recently, and because of some changes in my appointment and what I've done, and I'm getting older, and I'm also now the director of what's called the Physical Activity Center of Excellence, which is a community access program for about 550 people that come in from the community, use our facilities to exercise, and they come from older populations, cardiac rehabilitation, they're cancer patients, and then a group of people with spinal cord injuries as well. So that's really driven my interest in skeletal muscle for populations who are a little bit older and have significant disease burdens, much like the patients that you're talking about that are going for joint replacement, for example.
Okay. Well, and I guess, so for anyone then who's sort of tuned into this video and who's eagerly anticipating the secret to living a long and healthy life.
I hope I can share something relevant to them. Yeah, sure.
Okay, excellent. Well, as we move on, then should we continue with a few more definitions to help
Sure.
set the framework for this conversation?
Yeah, absolutely.
So one topic that a lot of your research centers around is this idea of sarcopenia. And for some, that may be familiar to some people watching this, but not to everyone, I'm sure. And even I thought I had a good handle on it, but as I was looking through some of your research, I realized that I probably need some few additional points on that too. So should we begin there and see how we go?
Sure. So I think when I explain what sarcopenia is to people, I like to use an analogy that I think most people are maybe not aware of, but when they hear the analogy, they grasp the concept. So Sarcopenia, literally defined, is the age-related decline in muscle mass and muscle function. So the function piece has sort of been added in more recent years to what originally was the definition of why people, as they got older, lost muscle, and they lose strength as a result. The precursor to what I think most of us know about, which is osteoporosis, which is essentially brittle bones that fracture, is actually something called osteopenia. Mm-hmm. The difference is there is no sarcoporosis that is the follow-on from sarcopenia, because there's no clinical endpoint like a fracture in a bone that you could say, oh, this person was osteoporotic. So it's more of a gradual, I would call it rather, not than a disease, but a syndrome, probably that's related to a person's diet, definitely to their sex, whether they're men or women, and postmenopausal women, et cetera, and probably to their activity level, and a combination of some other factors that would include inflammation and everything else like that, that results in why older people lose muscle, get weaker, and eventually, have mobility issues.
Okay. And what are the main factors that will define, as far as we understand currently, how quickly that muscle starts to reduce?
Yeah, so the usual figure or the graph that's drawn is that, you're born, and then you grow, and then your muscle mass peaks probably in about your 20s. And then at some point, and it probably differs quite substantially from person to person, but your muscle mass begins to decline. The decline then is going to follow a different type of trajectory depending on usually two variables. The first of which is how much dietary protein you get. That's a big driver of muscle, and how physically active you are. So you could imagine somebody who grew and then sort of hit their peak muscle mass and strength, and then didn't eat much protein, wasn't very physically active, probably had a lot of other health issues as well, and their muscle mass declines quite precipitously. The other individual is somebody who gets good amounts of dietary protein, is very physically active, and then they have a curve that's much flatter. The problem is that the first individual we were talking about will cross some sort of, it's not really a threshold, but let's just say that their risk for mobility problems goes up much quicker than the other individuals. So they're more prone to not being able to do activities of daily living, to falls, and to dependent living. So I'm sure a lot of your folks who are looking at joint issues would probably self-identify that their physical mobility has declined. Mm-hmm. And so we're talking there about somebody who's on the downward trajectory, and then now has done a little bit less. And what can we do to help them if they recover from their surgery or prepare for their surgery, so that they come out the other side and still enjoy a good quality of life and are still physically mobile.
Yeah, and I think there you're approaching a topic with, well, as so much of your research is helping us understand the importance of keeping active, and certainly different types of exercise, and how that can be used to build muscle mass and to sort of guard against this decline over time. And of course, that can be quite difficult and frustrating to hear if one is in so much pain that it's difficult to move, and one isn't able to move as much as one would want. Like, what in your from your experience of these kind of conversations, what's your approach to that difficult topic?
Yeah, it is. It's really, really difficult. And, let's just say right off the bat, the sort of the rider statement or the disclaimer is that pain is very difficult to manage for a lot of people. And most people make the decision to have joint replacement. It's driven by pain. And, certainly I think in the UK and here in Canada, quite similar medical systems. Mm-hmm. But usually people make the decision, and then there's anywhere from sort of 6 months to, depending on how much pain you are, possibly even 2 years before you would get your joint replaced. So it varies, and patient priorities go up and down. I think one of the key points that I make to people, and we have, the average age of people who come to our center, for example, is close to 70. So we have a lot of people with both rheumatoid and osteoarthritis. Mm-hmm. And one of the key things that I tell them is a lot of them are afraid of moving too much. And the primary activity that makes their knees hurt, unfortunately, is walking. So you walk less. And that's a fundamental activity that you need to do to be able to be physically mobile. So one of the things that we say is we work predominantly on trying to make that person a little bit stronger. And I tell them, I'm like, I promise you, you might go through a little period where the pain gets transiently worse, but over time, it will get better. Mm-hmm. And the other point I make to them is that I said, you don't have to come in here 5 days a week. You don't need to do extraordinarily, strenuous exercises. We do it all within your capacity, and we work within your pain tolerance as well. So if you tell us something is painful, we're not cracking the whip and saying, no, you got to push through this barrier, So it's not no pain, no gain. It's no pain, no pain. Yeah. And the smallest changes make a big difference. And I think that that's something that's really a message that's lost. And I'm fond of telling people that not just from a pain standpoint, but from a chronic disease risk standpoint, the biggest reduction in risk happens when somebody goes from doing very little to doing something. Yeah. And so that's a big distinction between, no, we need you to exercise, 5 times a week, 30 minutes a day, 150 minutes. And everybody just goes, who has the time? Who can be bothered? Why would I do that? So I get it. And I hear people. So I say, we start slow. We move according to how you feel. And we tell people, I'll promise you, and I'm almost perfect in that pain is mitigated usually.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely, Professor. I mean, that's something that we've come back to time and time again in this video series, that, it's as the old saying goes, little and often is the key. And the best exercise is the smallest amount of exercise that you could possibly keep doing on a regular basis, pretty much. Yeah. And so it needs to be something that you enjoy doing, and, often together with people, although with current COVID constraints, that's challenging, but there are Zoom classes and things like that. And also about like the role of tracking progress over time and seeing how things can add up, such as by using the Joint School app, which, we'll make sure there's a link beneath this to where anyone can download and use that. That's a free app. And one of the things that enables you to do is to link in the step counts that most smartphones these days count how many steps we take each day. And it can be actually really quite both revealing and encouraging to see them change over time, and sort of set some goals together with a physiotherapist or together with your surgeon or your general practitioner, whoever it may be, or even a family member that can help guide you to slowly but surely increasing the level of activity.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah. But you also mentioned that, so it kind of seems as though the two key things are activity and protein. Now, is it the case that protein can then be used to compensate for a drop in activity? Let's say if I'm going in for a knee or a hip replacement, and I know I'm going, that will impact my activity level somewhat, hopefully with a view to perhaps becoming more active, but certainly there'll be a period of weeks where I won't be moving as much. Can I increase my protein intake to cancel out some of that loss of muscle that would happen?
It's a good question. I mean, I think when we talk about, a relatively new science of sort of prehabilitation prior to surgery, it rests on a lot of principles. The chief one is around actually trying to make yourself a little bit more physically active in preparation for what is going to happen on the backside of the surgery. Surgery is, going to take a while to recover from. Mobility is going to be restricted, and it's going to take time to recover. The protein is sort of, I always look at the two as being synergistic. In other words, you could take protein and you're probably going to help yourself. You could recover a little faster. You could be physically active and you're going to recover faster. Together, they do more than either one does independently. So if you can couple the two, then you're really in the best of both worlds. But, when we talk about protein, I like to try and say that it's easier to out exercise or out activity the decline than it is to out eat or out protein the decline. So it's not that protein doesn't do something. It does a relatively small job relative to the physical activity, trying to make it illustrative there, is about this, but then the two of them together are actually much bigger than either independently. So there's some synergism between the two.
Okay. And when you say protein, I mean, what kind of, what are we talking in terms of, what one might find on a typical lunch or dinner plate? What's a good amount of protein, and what's a more than enough amount of protein?
Sure. Yeah. So I think that the main point, and people in the UK eat much like people in Canada, given our shared heritage.
Right.
The point is that I think most people eat the smallest amount of protein at the breakfast meal, a little bit more at lunch, and then a fairly large serving at dinner. Most protein foods are the ones that I think people typically think of. So meats and eggs, but dairy is a very high quality protein source as well. And it's not that plant proteins do not contribute protein. They do. It's just not quite as high quality as from animal sources. But certainly you get protein from lots of plants and lots of different foods throughout the day. But it's the major ones that people would associate with it. One of the key messages we like to say is, instead of sort of trying to jack up every meal with protein, is to particularly focus on the breakfast meal as being a very small serving of protein for most people. So as people go into surgery, the one change that a lot of people have found easier to make is to incorporate a higher protein yogurt at their breakfast meal, to drink a glass of milk. It's okay to eat an egg. Eggs won't kill you. and do that going into surgery, rather than a very grain-driven breakfast, for example.
Okay. Interesting. And whether, seeing as there's such a wealth of research that you've been working on in this field, like that, so those are some really nice tangible examples of what we can all take from this conversation and from your research. Are there other things that you've learned over the years that you just really wish like was more widely known, or that could translate into these little positive steps, or these little changes, as you mentioned, that we can make in our day-to-day to
Yeah, I mean, I think that around the small changes is I like that approach, as opposed to the wholesale. I'm going to switch off and do this today, and those types of changes for the vast majority of people are either difficult, and B, they're very hard to sustain. And so I like to try and say to people, if there's a suite of things this week that you could change, and here they are, which one can you manage? And which one can you manage and then sustain? So if it is, okay, I'll drink a glass of milk at breakfast, I'm like, okay, we'll take that. And then week 2 is, I'm going to take 500 more steps today than I did, yesterday, or, on Monday last week. And, on Tuesday, every Tuesday, I'm going to practice my chair stands, my up and down stands. And those sorts of things are, little nudges that don't require, okay, Mr. and Mrs. Smith, we need this, and you're just like, whoa, and then in the end, you just say, forget it, and don't do any of it. So I think all of the small things begin to add up, and you would do yourself a huge favor in terms of, particularly pre-surgery and on the backside, of you having a much better experience as a result of your surgery and recovering a lot faster. And as you said, the pain goes away. That's the beauty of the surgery. And then hopefully you have a little bit more active lifestyle, you're eating a little bit better, and your quality of life improves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we're still at that, albeit in a strange time, but we're still at the start of the year where people are making resolutions and setting goals for the coming months. And is there one resolution or one goal that you would say is the most important in terms of maintaining a healthy life?
Yeah, so the research program that I've run now for 20 odd years, we've focused on the activity, because muscle is in the middle, that is able to either grow muscle when you're younger, not that you can't when you're older, but we look at it more of a mitigation strategy. So we're trying to say somebody's losing muscle at this rate, and then we want to change that curve to doing something like this. and the only form of exercise that does that is resistive exercise. So it's loading exercise. And most people imagine that the first thing they think is big, heavy iron bars, weights, etc. And we try to dispel the notion that really heavy loads are necessary to achieve benefits. And I make the point to people, again, it's exactly true with the physical activity vis-a-vis steps and walking or anything else like that, is that the amount of loading that you do doesn't actually need to be particularly heavy. And as long as you do it to a high degree of effort. Now in the lab with young people, we've done it to complete fatigue, but with older people in our center, we post a lot of charts that are, it has a Borg scale and it says, 6 out of 10, that's a blue, 7 out of 10, it's this. And they try and work until we say, you don't need to go into the red zone where it's 10 out of 10 and you're just, flat on your back, but we'd like you to hit the orange or the yellow. You're not feeling too good today. Okay, we'll stay down here and say, how did that feel? And you say, oh, that was hard work. I'm like, that's okay. That's what we're asking. That's relative to what you feel is hard work. And, that can be, like I said, the chair stands, hands on your chest, sitting down on a chair and standing up. Those are perfect exercises that you could do. I mean, you don't have to go to a gym to do that. You've got a good chair, no arms. That's why you have to do this. And try and rise out of the chair, sit down and do it 10 times. And then, you'll figure after about the 10th one, you're like, okay, yeah, I'm feeling a bit of a burn. And you're like, okay, well, that's all we need. That's all we're asking.
And how much do we know about how much of a positive impact that can have? We're talking about mitigating or working against this decline in muscle over time. But is it impossible to build and like increase muscle as we get older? Or
yeah, great question. And I'm often asked. People say, when does sarcopenia start? When does muscle mass start? And I always say, well, it's 55. And they say 55. And I said, yeah, next year it's 56. And they say, what do you mean? I said, well, that's just a personal observation. But, without being funny, I mean, I think that the point is that younger people, when they have this sort of, a decline in muscle mass because of they're in hospital or whatever, they just bounce back, no problem. And that's the beauty of youth, right? As you get older, it becomes more difficult. I won't, dispute that, but it's not impossible. It just requires sustained, relatively hard work over a period of time. You might not get back to 100% of what you had before, but if what you had before was pain and you didn't like, walk around or do X, Y, and Z, then the bottom line is it'll be a huge difference that you could make to yourself. I think there's a lot of focus on steps, which is fine, no problem. But the one thing that I do think, particularly with joint replacements, hips and knees, is that being stronger is a real it's putting a little bit reserve in the bank, if you like, against that disuse to be able to recover.
Yeah. Okay. So that sounds quite reassuring then for those who may be watching us right now, who are either getting ready for a joint replacement or on the road to recovery from the operation, and will, all being well, before too long, will be in a place where the pain that they've been experiencing that's been limiting their ability to move is gone, and they can start not just regaining, but maybe even moving on from the level they were at before.
Yeah, I mean, I think most people who head into a joint replacement experience this sort of decline coming in, mainly because it's so painful to do the things that they probably should be doing. Mm-hmm. Now, if we can get a patient, to us before surgery, let's say 3 to 4 weeks, even if they give us that amount of time, sometimes they only give us, say 2 weeks, then you can make that person stronger, maybe not, super strong, but actually a little bit more able to withstand the stress of the surgery. And the surgery, it's tough, right? And I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it for anybody. It's a tough slog, but it's one of those things that I think it's definitely worth having the surgery so that, you're pain-free afterwards and you can recover more successfully. So yeah, absolutely. It's about building yourself up and trying to avoid that really deep valley, and then, don't do much on the other side, and that's a really tough proposition to recover from.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I think we've got some really encouraging take-homes here. So, prehab makes a difference.
Yep.
Exercise makes a difference, especially loading. Eating the right stuff makes a difference, and with the right stuff, we're talking protein, and a lot of the classic things that we've touched on. Anything else you'd want to say to sort of summarize this session before we sign off?
Yeah. So, one of the things I like to try and point out to people when I talk about successful aging, I have an analogy that I think is pretty apt, and I say, there's a three-legged stool, and milkmaids sit on a three-legged stool, and it's a super steady structure. But if you've got one leg that's shorter than the other, then the stool wobbles and it becomes very unstable. So I like to say, and I borrow a phrase from a very successful ager, a guy named Jack LaLanne, who was, a tight tracksuit doing bodybuilding and calisthenics in the 50s and 60s in the United States. But, he had a great phrase, and it was that exercise or activity is king and nutrition is queen. Put them together and you get a kingdom. And I definitely think that applies. As I said, the two synergistically are much more powerful than each one alone. The third leg on which all of this sits is definitely a good social system, support from other people, friends, family, etc., a sense of purpose, a lack of, if you can get it out of your life, a lack of ageism. And I understand that that's a societal issue as well. But when people feel supported and they feel as if the journey that they're going through, either in life, but particularly in surgery, they've got support of a team around them to help them in recovery, help them get back on their feet, and help them to enjoy the quality of life. When you have all three of those things go pretty well. And I think that's a formula that sort of, is a good trajectory for people to follow into later life. And I like in the UK, for example, I know that you guys have essentially got a minister of loneliness now that is, looking at social isolation and social determinants of how older people age, and it's huge. And I've only just more recently been exposed to the concept, but see a lot of physiology actually interfacing with that issue. So, before I said, oh yeah, exercise and nutrition, that's great. And I thought, that was it. That was all you needed to do. And then somebody said, what about the social side? And the more I thought about it, the more I read about it, I'm like, yeah, you need to have all three. So hopefully all of your listeners and your viewers are in that situation. And if you're not, I encourage you to try and reach out to find that team that'll support you through everything.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really enjoyed that formula, that reference there, the king and the queen of the kingdom, and the milkmaid stool.
Well, the king and the queen is borrowed. The milkmaid stool is. I'll take a little credit for that. But try and rock a milkmaid stool with the three legs. You can't push it over. It's incredible.
Yeah, but I think within that, like this idea that you can't separate mind and body, right? That's something that
no, and it's true. It's a underappreciated from my aspect as a physiologist about the psychology going into the surgery and everything else. So I think under the NHS and with a lot of the medical care in the UK and here in Canada, it's not just a surgeon anesthesiologist, it's the surgeon anesthesiologist. It's usually a support worker that comes in terms of mobility, and somebody else that talks about what are the psychological issues. And so you need to feel as if you're supported in this. And it's a journey, and it's a tough one at times, but hopefully one that is beneficial in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm hopeful as well that this conversation, while it's not going to replace a nice conversation with a family member or a healthcare professional that knows you as an individual, but hopefully our conversation here will, maybe it's a little step in the right direction towards feeling a bit more informed and empowered about one's situation and the things you can do and so on. So thank you very much, Professor, for your time. And
absolutely my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on the show, Axel. Appreciate it.
I really enjoyed it. And to everyone watching this, thank you so much for joining us again. And as ever, send in your suggestions, comments below. Any suggestions for another topic for us to cover, we'll get to it. And I'll make sure that there's links below to where you can find out more about the fascinating work that Professor Phillips is up to. So everyone, until next time. Stay safe out there, be well, and keep up the good work. And thank you again, Prof. Bye-bye now.